All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are talking about one of the most profound human experiences you can have, but we're going to look at it through a completely different lens, not as some mystical journey, but as a structural, neurological shift in the brain. So to get us started, think about this. What if what people have called enlightenment for centuries isn't really about reaching some higher state at all? What if it's actually more like a bug fix for your brain, a patch for our cognitive code that changes the brain's default operating system? Okay, so first things first, we need to tackle some pretty common ideas. We're going to start by taking apart this popular notion of awakening as some kind of temporary, mystical state that you have to struggle to achieve. Yeah, these probably sound familiar, right? This idea of an incredible, blissful experience, a moment where all thought just stops, a peak moment that you then spend the rest of your life trying to get back to. Now, these experiences are absolutely real, but what if they aren't the main event? What if they're just a side effect of something else entirely? And that brings us to a pretty radical new way of looking at it. The core idea here is that this isn't about a temporary feeling. It's about a permanent change in the brain's configuration. It's not a new program you run. It's like a full upgrade to the entire operating system. So the scientific term for this new configuration is PNSE, which stands for Persistent Non-Symbolic Experience. Now, the key words here are persistent and stable. This isn't some fleeting state you visit for a weekend. It's a fundamental, long-term shift in how your brain processes reality. You're experiencing it directly, instead of through the constant filter of thoughts and symbols. It actually becomes your new baseline. And right here, this is the whole ballgame. This is the central definition. PNSE is when recursive self-referential processing stops being the default, always-on program. So what on earth does that even mean? Let's make it super simple. Just imagine your mind has a little self-narrator app, and it's constantly running in the background 24/7, commenting on everything, building a story about you. It's the voice of your inner monologue. So this narrator app, what is it actually doing all day? Well, it's constantly self-referencing. It's always asking, how am I doing? What does this mean for me? It evaluates, it compares, it builds the never-ending story of your life. And here's the really ironic part. It's even the voice that judges your attempts to get it to be quiet, asking, am I meditating correctly? Am I being mindful enough right now? You know, this new framework completely changes what the goal is. If it's all about quieting that inner narrator, then the goal is no longer about chasing these experiences of profound depth or intensity. We have to separate the actual structural change from how it feels moment to moment. And this just lays out the difference perfectly. A temporary state, that's something you induce with a technique, and you always return from it. It feels super intense and blissful because of the huge contrast with your normal state. But a stable configuration, PNSE, is the new normal. There's no baseline to return to. It doesn't need any special feeling, and it's completely compatible with just living an ordinary life. So, what about those incredibly deep, blissful, or profound experiences? Well, think of them like the details of a dream. They can feel unbelievably vivid, personal, and meaningful while you're in them. But from a structural perspective, they aren't what matters. The important thing isn't the content of the dream. It's the simple act of waking up. So how does this actually happen inside our heads? Let's get into the neurology of what it means to have a quiet mind, to get this new default operating system installed. We can simplify it down to 3 key networks in the brain. First, you've got the default mode network, the DMN. That's our narrator, the part that generates the story of me. Then there's the salience network, or SN. Think of that as a spotlight, tagging things that are important and relevant to me. And finally, the reticular activating system, the RAS, which is kind of like the volume knob for your emotions. The journey to PNSE can look something like this. At baseline, for most people, the narrator is always on, loud and clear. Then, you might get to a point where it starts to flicker on and off. Later, its voice might get delayed, a lot quieter. And the destination, PNSE, is a state where the narrator is simply off by default. It's not gone forever. It just becomes a tool that turns on only when you need it for a specific task, like planning for the future or thinking about the past. So, what does this mean for our day-to-day emotions? Well, it leads to a totally different kind of non-reactivity. This isn't about gritting your teeth and suppressing an emotion. It's that the whole mechanism that creates the reactive loop in the first place, The spotlight tagging something as a personal threat, the volume knob cranking up the emotion, and the narrator spinning a story about it. That entire chain reaction just doesn't get triggered. Now, for a lot of people, this idea of the narrator disappearing can sound kind of scary, like you're losing yourself. So, in our last section, let's talk about why letting go of this narrator might feel like, well, like nothing at all. So what about that really common feeling of losing it or falling back into my ego? Well, this framework suggests that very feeling is just a product of the narrator app turning back on. It's the narrator creating a story of comparison. I was there, but now I'm here. I've lost something. Without that narrator making the comparison, there's no story of loss. And this is maybe the most powerful analogy for it. When you wake up from a dream, your dream self just vanishes. You don't mourn its loss. You don't feel like a part of you has died. It disappears without any existential crisis because you recognize it wasn't the real you to begin with. The self created by the narrator is a lot like that. So let's end with this. If this framework is correct, it means the constant inner narrator isn't a necessary part of being human at all. It's an optional feature, which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to ponder. If that narrator is optional, then who or what is doing the listening?